Welcome back, everyone. Ready to dive into the world of botanical drug development today?
Sounds exciting.
It is. We're going to be focusing on cannabis and psychedelic mushrooms.
Two botanicals with incredible potential.
But they're not your average pharmaceutical. So where do we even begin?
Oh, one of the biggest hurdles is quality control.
Because they're not like, say, aspirin, right? A single, isolated ingredient.
Exactly. We're talking about a complex mix of compounds.
And that mix can vary, right? From plant to plant, even batch to batch.
Absolutely. Take cannabis, for example.
Yeah.
The ratio of THC to CBD, those two well-known cannabinoids, can fluctuate dramatically.
So two products labeled cannabis extract could have very different effects.
Precisely. One might have a much higher THC content, leading to more pronounced psychoactive effects.
That sounds like a recipe for inconsistent patient outcomes.
It is a major concern. And the same goes for psychedelic mushrooms. The levels of psilocybin and psilocin, the psychoactive compounds, can vary significantly.
So someone taking psilocybin for therapy might have vastly different experiences.
Exactly. It all depends on the species, the growing conditions, even how the mushrooms are stored.
Okay, this is starting to sound a bit unnerving. How do we make sure these botanical medicines are safe and consistent?
That's where the Botanical Drug Master File, or BDMF, comes in.
BDMF, another acronym. Fill me in.
It's basically a blueprint for quality control, a comprehensive document outlining the standards for a specific botanical raw material.
So kind of like a detailed recipe, ensuring that every batch turns out the same.
That's a great analogy. It includes the chemical fingerprint, the methods for identifying and quantifying the active compounds, and steps to ensure consistency.
Sounds pretty detailed. But how do scientists figure out what's in these botanicals in the first place? There are so many compounds, not just one or two.
That's where multi-component analysis comes in. Scientists use advanced techniques to identify and quantify all the biologically active compounds.
Wow, so they're really getting a complete picture of the plant's chemistry, not just the famous ones like THC or psilocybin.
Exactly. This detailed analysis is crucial for establishing quality standards. It helps manufacturers select the right plant material, control processing steps, and ensure accurate dosing.
Okay, I'm starting to see the importance of all of this. But what about the FDA? How are they approaching this whole botanical drug thing?
Well, the FDA has actually been quite proactive. They recognize the potential of these botanicals, but also the need for rigorous quality control.
So they are not just shutting it all down.
No, not at all. They've released draft guidance specifically for psychedelic drug development, pointing researchers to the existing botanical drug development guidance. And guess what?
What?
The BDMF is a cornerstone of that guidance.
So the FDA is saying, show us you understand these plants and can produce these medicines safely and consistently.
Precisely. They want to see proof that you've got the science down pat.
Makes sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
Are there other guidelines that affect botanical drug development?
There are. One that's particularly relevant is the ICH-M7 guideline.
ICH-M7. Okay, now you've lost me.
It stands for International Council for Harmonization of Technical Requirements for Pharmaceuticals for Human Use, Guideline M7. A mouthful, I know.
So what's it all about?
It focuses on assessing and controlling DNA-reactive impurities in pharmaceuticals to make sure there's no hidden danger in these botanicals.
So making sure they won't cause harm in the long run, like cancer.
Exactly. Botanicals, like any other raw material, can contain impurities or degradation products that could be risky. ICH-M7 helps control that risk.
This is getting pretty complex, but I'm starting to understand how all these pieces fit together. The BDMF, multi-component analysis, ICH-M7. It's all about making sure these botanical medicines are safe and effective. But what about the average person considering using a cannabis or a psilocybin product? What does this all mean for them?
Well, one of the most important things is accurate labeling.
So it's not enough to just slap a label on it that says cannabis or psilocybin.
Right. Imagine you're comparing two bottles of CBD oil. One just says CBD oil. The other lists specific cannabinoids and their concentrations. Which one seems more trustworthy?
Definitely the one with more information. Shows they've done their homework. But what about labeling for psychedelic mushrooms?
Even more critical, I'd say. Someone using psilocybin for therapy needs to know exactly how much they're getting. Inaccurate labeling could lead to unexpected, potentially risky experiences.
Makes perfect sense. Accurate labeling helps everyone make informed decisions, from prescribers to patients.
Exactly. It all comes back to those quality control measures we discussed.
Yeah.
The BDMF, multi-component analysis, they're the foundation for accurate, trustworthy labeling. But there's another layer to consider: where the raw materials come from in the first place.
Ah, right. Because even if the processing is perfect, the starting material could be contaminated.
Precisely. That brings us to an area that needs more investigation of potential contaminants in botanical raw materials. Things like pesticides, heavy metals, microbial contamination, all of that can pose risks to patients. So ensuring the purity of those raw materials is essential. And we'll dive deeper into that in the next part of our deep dive.
Sounds like a good place to pause for now. We've covered a lot of ground today. The complexities of botanicals, the importance of the BDMF, guidelines like ICH-M7. It's clear that creating safe and effective botanical medicines is a big task, but we've also seen the potential these therapies hold. So stay tuned for part 2 of our deep dive. We'll explore real-world examples and delve deeper into the challenges and opportunities in this fascinating field. Back again, ready to explore more of this botanical drug landscape. Last time, we left off with a bit of a cliffhanger talking about contaminants in those raw plant materials.
Right. Those plants, they don't exactly grow in pristine lab conditions, do they?
So we've got to worry about things like pesticides and heavy metals getting into the final product.
Exactly, and that's where good agricultural and collection practices, or GACP, come in.
GACP. Okay, what's that all about?
It's basically a set of guidelines for growing, harvesting, and processing those botanical materials, all to minimize contamination risk and keep that plant quality high.
So setting standards for the whole supply chain, from farm to finished product.
You got it. GACP covers everything. Soil quality, irrigation, pest control, how they store it, all of that.
Makes sense. So GACP ensures we're starting with good stuff, but then how do we turn those plants into standardized medicines?
That's where extraction and purification come in. And just like with GACP, there are guidelines to make sure these processes are safe and controlled.
So we're not just steeping some herbs in hot water here.
Nope, this is high-tech stuff, pharmaceutical grade. The goal is to get those desired compounds out while leaving behind anything that could be harmful or make the medicine less effective.
I imagine there are lots of different ways to do that, depending on the plant and what you're trying to extract.
Oh, yeah, there are tons of extraction methods out there. Solvent extraction is one, supercritical fluid extraction, even plain old water extraction.
Solvent extraction, so kind of like brewing coffee, but way more complex.
Ah, that's a good way to think about it. They use a solvent, like ethanol or hexane, to dissolve and separate the good stuff from the plant material.
And what about that supercritical fluid extraction? Sounds pretty fancy.
It is pretty advanced. They use a fluid, usually carbon dioxide, under really high pressure and temperature to extract the compounds. It's precise and environmentally friendly. Good for delicate botanicals, like essential oils.
Okay, so we've got solvent extraction, supercritical fluid extraction, good old-fashioned water extraction.
Okay.
But we can't stop there, right? We need to purify those extracts.
Right again. Usually they do a bunch of purification steps after the initial extraction. Get rid of any remaining impurities and concentrate the desired compounds.
So refining it to create a super potent and consistent final product.
You got it. And they use all sorts of techniques for that. Chromatography, crystallization, distillation. It's quite a process.
It really is fascinating, seeing how they're combining ancient knowledge about plants with all this modern science.
It's a really cool intersection of the old and the new, and it's not just rediscovering old remedies, it's unlocking the full potential of these plants and understanding how they really work.
Speaking of how they work, how do these botanical drugs actually do their thing in the body? Do they target specific receptors, like most pharmaceuticals?
That's a great question, and the answer is it's often a lot more complex than with single molecule drugs. Remember, we're dealing with multiple compounds all interacting with different pathways in the body.
So instead of one key fitting into one lock, we've got a whole bunch of keys that might be working on different locks, or even changing the shape of the door altogether.
That's a great analogy. And that's why research on botanical drugs is so tricky. They often have to study the whole extract, rather than focusing on just one isolated compound.
But that multi-targeted approach, it seems like it could be really helpful for those complex conditions, like chronic pain or mental health issues, where there are lots of factors at play.
There's definitely growing evidence that botanicals offer a more holistic way to treat those kinds of conditions. But of course, that makes it harder for researchers to figure out exactly how it all works and how to design clinical trials to really measure those benefits.
Okay, so challenges, but also huge potential. But let's get practical for a second. We talked about accurate labeling being so important for consumers. What should people actually look for on the label of a botanical product?
Good question. The first thing you want is clear identification of the botanical species, the plant's name, and information about which part of the plant the extract came from. For example, it might say Echinacea purpurea root extract.
Makes sense. Different parts of the plant can have different levels of active compounds, right?
Exactly. And you should also look for the extraction method they used and the solvent, if there was one.
So, is a water-based extract always better than one made with alcohol?
Not necessarily. It depends on the compounds they're trying to get out and what the product is supposed to do. Some things dissolve better in alcohol, while others might be damaged by heat or certain solvents. It's all about choosing the best method for that specific plant and purpose.
Okay, so pay attention to the species, the plant part, the extraction method, and the solvent. Got it. But how about the potency? How do we know how much of those active compounds we're actually getting?
That's where standardization comes in. And of course, accurate labeling. A good label will clearly state the concentration of the key active compounds, in milligrams or percentages.
So like a bottle of CBD oil might say it has 10 milligrams of CBD per serving.
Exactly. That way, you can compare different products and choose one that meets your needs. And healthcare providers can make better recommendations for their patients.
It seems like there's a lot to consider when choosing a botanical product. But how can we tell if a company is reputable? If their products are truly high quality?
We'll talk about third-party testing, quality certifications, and other things that can help you make informed choices about botanical products.
And we're back, ready for the final installment of our Botanical Drug Deep Dive.
Let's do it. We've covered a lot of ground already.
From those GACP guidelines for growing and harvesting, to the techie stuff like extraction and purification.
And, of course, why accurate labeling and understanding those complex plant extracts is so important.
But now it's time to equip our listeners with the knowledge they need to choose botanical products wisely.
Because, the market out there can be a bit overwhelming.
It really can. So many claims and certifications flying around. Where do we even start?
Well, one of the most important things to look for is independent third-party testing.
Okay, third-party testing, what does that even mean?
Basically, the company making that botanical product sends samples off to an independent lab.
Ah, so they're not just testing their own products.
Exactly. That lab analyzes the chemical makeup, the potency, and the purity.
So it's like having an unbiased expert double-check everything.
Precisely. A reputable company will be totally open about their third-party testing.
Mm-hmm.
They should share the results, maybe on their website or with a QR code on the product label.
So if they're being secretive about their test results, that's a red flag.
Transparency is key. If they're confident in their product, they'll be happy to share that information.
Makes sense. So let's say I've got a lab report in front of me. What should I be looking at?
First off, check that the lab itself is reputable, accredited, with a good track record. Then, the report should clearly identify the plant species they tested, which part of the plant was used, and how they extracted it. And of course, it should list the concentrations of those key active compounds.
So it's basically confirming that the product actually contains what the label says it does.
You got it. But it's not just about what's supposed to be there. The report should also show levels of any potential contaminants. Pesticides, heavy metals, microbes.
So making sure it's safe to use.
Exactly. And remember, a good company will test each batch of their products, so you know that quality is consistent.
Got it. Third-party testing check. What else should I keep in mind?
Well, quality certifications can be helpful too. There are a bunch of organizations out there offering certifications for botanical products.
Any example?
Sure. One that a lot of people recognize is the USDA Organic Seal. That means the plants were grown without those synthetic pesticides, herbicides, or fertilizers.
So it's a more eco-friendly, natural approach.
Yeah, you could say that. Then you've got certifications that focus specifically on the quality and potency of the extract itself.
Like what?
Well, there's the American Herbal Pharmacopoeia, or AHP. They develop these really detailed monographs for botanicals, covering things like identification, quality control, therapeutic uses, even potential safety issues.
So if a product meets AHP standards, that's a good sign.
It is. And there are other certifications that focus on specific types of botanical products. The U.S. Hemp Authority, for instance, has a program for those hemp-derived CBD products. They've got really strict standards for the whole process, from cultivation to labeling.
Wow, there are a lot of certifications to keep track of. It seems like this whole botanical product world is getting more and more sophisticated.
It is. And that's a good thing. As the industry grows, all of these quality controls are going to be super important. Building trust with consumers and making sure these products are safe and effective.
So we've got the third-party testing, we've got the certifications, But isn't there also a personal element to choosing the right botanical product?
Oh, absolutely. It's not all just about labels and certifications. It's about paying attention to your own body and how you react to these products.
So listen to my body, see how it feels.
Exactly. Start low and slow, gradually increasing your dose if needed, and be really mindful of any changes you notice.
That's good advice for any new supplement, really. Any extra things to keep in mind with botanicals specifically.
Well, remember, these aren't just inert substances. Botanicals can interact with other medications or supplements you might be taking.
So talk to my doctor before I start adding anything new, right?
Always a good idea. They can help you figure out if there are any potential interactions and whether that botanical product is a good fit for your needs.
It seems like knowledge really is power when it comes to using botanicals safely.
It really is. And that's what this whole deep dive has been about, giving you the knowledge to navigate this exciting but sometimes confusing world.
We've really explored the whole journey of botanical drug development, from those careful cultivation practices to the science behind turning those plants into medicine.
We've talked about standardization, that multi-component analysis, and all those important quality controls, but ultimately the choice is yours.
So to all of our listeners out there, stay curious, keep learning, ask those questions. There's so much to explore in the world of botanicals.
Nature's pharmacy has so much to offer, but it's important to approach these powerful plants with respect, knowledge, and a healthy dose of curiosity.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into botanical drug development. Until next time, happy exploring and stay well.